There are no victims, only volunteers. Written and narrated by Peter J. Merrick. For most of my adult life, I believe certain people had an extraordinary ability to drain the life out of everyone around them. They left conversations feeling lighter, while the people who cared about them walked away emotionally exhausted. Looking back, I thought I was simply unlucky enough to have crossed paths with more than my fair share of those people. Years ago, I used to call them emotional vampires. Today, I think spiritual vampires is a better description because they do not simply consume your time. They quietly consume your peace. They feed on your empathy, your sense of responsibility, and your desire to help until you begin carrying burdens that never belonged to you in the first place. For years, I studied toxic personalities, narcissists, and manipulators, believing the answer was learning how to recognize them. Then one day, life asked me a much better question. Peter, how did they get into your life? The answer arrived before I had time to invent another excuse. I opened the door. Nobody forced me to answer one more phone call after I already knew how the conversation would end. Nobody forced me to remain in relationships that had quietly become one-sided. Nobody forced me to keep solving problems that belonged to someone else, or to believe that if I simply loved harder, listened longer, or sacrificed a little more, reciprocity would eventually appear. Looking back, I was not simply surrounded by takers. I had become a volunteer. That is one of the hardest sentences I have ever written because it removes the comfort of blame. As long as someone else was responsible for my exhaustion, I never had to examine my own participation in the story. The moment I accepted that I had been volunteering, I also realized something extraordinary. Volunteers can resign. Like many men, I confused kindness with responsibility. I believed being a good man meant always being available, always understanding, and always giving people one more chance. Looking back, I do not think that was compassion. I think it was fear disguised as virtue. I was afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being misunderstood, and afraid that saying no somehow made me selfish. Apparently, younger Peter believed unlimited patience was a virtue. Older Peter has reached a different conclusion. Compassion without boundaries eventually becomes self-abandonment. That sentence took me more than 50 years to earn. One of the greatest lessons life has ever taught me is that every unhealthy relationship requires two participants. One person may be willing to take far more than they give, but someone else must continue giving long after reciprocity has disappeared. That realization forced me to stop looking out the window and finally look in the mirror. The important question was never, why are they taking? The important question was, why do I keep volunteering? That question changed my life. Healthy people respect boundaries because they understand that time, attention, and emotional energy are finite resources. People who benefit from the absence of your boundaries often negotiate with them. Looking back, I realized every time I ignored that quiet voice inside me telling me something was not right, I paid for it. Sometimes the price was disappointment. Sometimes it was years. This is not an invitation to become cynical. The world desperately needs kind, generous, and compassionate people. What it does not need are people who quietly sacrifice their own peace, believing martyrdom is the highest expression of love. Healthy relationships have reciprocity. Sometimes I carry you, sometimes you carry me. Over time, the scales naturally find their balance because both people care about the well-being of the other. Spiritual vampires are different. They are not looking for balance. They are looking for access. Access to your time, access to your attention, access to your emotional reserves. The tragedy is not that they ask. The tragedy is that volunteers keep saying yes. Today, people occasionally ask me how I recognize a spiritual vampire. The truth is, I do not spend much time looking for them anymore. I spend my time paying attention to volunteers because I know one very well. I spent most of my life being him. Looking back, I no longer believe freedom begins when difficult people disappear from our lives. Difficult people have always existed and they always will. I believe freedom begins the moment we stop volunteering our peace to people who have no intention of protecting it. If this old fart has learned anything worth passing on, it is simply this. Guard your peace with the same care you would guard your family, your health, and your life savings. Give generously, love deeply, help whenever you genuinely can. Just remember that generosity without discernment eventually becomes permission. And permission is what allows spiritual vampires to make themselves at home. Looking back, I have come to believe something that would have offended the younger Peter. In many of the relationships that exhausted me, I was not simply a victim. I was a volunteer. Thankfully, volunteers can resign. Peter J. Merrick, A.K.A. old fart, former volunteer, still learning, still smiling, and finally wise enough to protect the peace that makes everything else possible.